I'll just say welcome everyone to the Future Trends Forum. I'm very, very glad to see so many people here. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm going to be your MC for the next hour. I want to welcome back people who were here last week for Audrey Waters, and I want to welcome new people who haven't been here before. You're in the Shindig environment, and I'll explain a little bit about that in just a second. Christopher and team, if you could advance the slide, please. What you're seeing is a project of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. That's a monthly report, which is an environmental scan looking at trends longitudinally and through the news and immediate environment. It's been going on for a few years. You can find it online at ftt.us. And what you're experiencing today and for the next few weeks is a live version of that, where we're experimenting with talking with people to get their take on future trends in technology and education. Next slide, please, Chris. Future Trends in Technology and Education is generously sponsored by NYSERNet, New York State Educational Network. We're very glad for their sponsorship. And speaking of sponsors, next slide, please. The technology they're using is generously provided by Shindig, which is not only providing the physical and digital platform that we're using right now, but also very generously providing human support and a lot of scheduling infrastructure. So we're very, very grateful to Shindig for all of their help. Next slide, please. Now, today we're going to be talking with Rich DeMillo. We're looking at the future of education and how education changes under the impact of numerous forces, including technology. Every week, we discuss these topics with a practitioner, a visionary, an expert, someone who we just find to be terribly interesting and important. And Rich DeMillo is no exception to this. He's currently the executive director at Georgia Tech's Center for 21st Century Universities. He's also the chair of computer science and professor of management there. One of the reasons that we brought him in is because he's been working very hard on a fascinating hybrid master's degree program in computer science, but also because he is an author of several very provocative books. And let me just recommend Abelard to Apple, which came out a few years ago, and also Revolution in Higher Education. I'll be able to see my Kindle copy right here, which came out last year and which we've been online reading of through my blog. I find Rich to be a very, very stimulating, provocative, and surprising thinker, as well as practitioner in the field of technology and education, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Now, keep in mind that the way the setup works is we have the two of us will be on stage, and Chris, if you could bring Rich on the stage, please. We'll be hogging the limelight. We'll be talking, and you'll be seeing our smiling faces and our gestures as we go. We also have a chat box. So if you would like to be able to add to the conversation, and we very much want you to, please chat like so. So just to get things rolling, if you could take a minute and just say a couple of words about who you are and or where you are. As we go for the next hour, please contribute to the chat box. We'll be watching it very, very carefully. We're very keen to see your discussion, to see your thoughts, your reflections, your pushbacks, your arguments, your howls of outrage, and your cheers and examples. We're also going to be monitoring TweetDeck so that if there are any possible comments that come up there, we'll bring them in. For the first roughly 35, 40 minutes, this is going to be Rich and I going back and forth. And after that, along the way, we'll bring in your comments and suggestions. So, Rich, welcome to the Future Trends Forum.
Hey, Brian, thank you.
Glad to see you. We're very, very glad to have you on board. As someone who's been following your work for several years, it's very nice to meet you. Well, if not in person, then the next best thing.
This is pretty close.
It is. It is. And I'm speaking to a computer scientist who has the best informed opinion one could want. What I'd like to do is start off talking about Revolution in Higher Education, which I think is a very important, very provocative book, very accessible and exciting book. I commend everybody on this conversation. And what I'd like to do is to ask you some questions based on our reading of it, and I'd like to see how you can rep on them.
Okay.
My first question is thinking about digital learning and digital teaching. A major theme of your book, and I think perhaps the central theme, is the use of digital technologies to broaden access to American higher education. Well, how can we change digital teaching so that that broadens access to a larger audience? And right now, we're very successful in connecting online learning to professionals and self-taught autodidacts. How can we change the way we do teaching online so that it reaches a bigger audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm always torn when we start talking about who currently benefits from digital learning and digital teaching, because it's hard for me to project out much beyond where we are right now. We're at the very early stages of this, and I think when we talk about digital learning, I'm making a break in history here between the kinds of things that we saw in the 90s or even before, and what happened from 2012 on. So there was this explosion that I call the magic year in the book, and it's hard to know what the constituency actually is. For every analysis that says these are post-professional people that are coming to MOOCs, or these are people that are self-motivated, there's a corresponding story which says this is a high school kid in rural Georgia that doesn't have access to a chemistry lab, or doesn't have access to a foreign language teacher that's getting on and replacing assets that should have been available in the university. So I want to talk a little bit about exactly who is benefiting from this, but just as a marker, I don't think I'm ready to accept the fact that these are digital natives, autodidacts, whatever the characterization is. I think we simply don't know at this point.
Well, it's a really good answer. And I do want to point again that you refer to the people who started off the magic year, Sebastian Thrun and Michael Crow and others, as the revolutionaries. I just want to press on this a little bit harder, not necessarily at the institutional level, but perhaps at the level of curriculum and pedagogy. Is there anything that academic programs, departments, and individual practitioners can do that how can they change their teaching with technology to make it more accessible?
Well, I make a big deal in the book about mastery learning, and the reason I do that is that it's one of those elephants that's been in the room for 30 years. We know that if we don't sit students in front of a sage on a stage for 50 minutes at a time, and we engage them in some process of assessment and personalized instruction, that everyone's performance goes up, everyone's achievement levels goes up. And there's this great quote at the end of Benjamin Bloom's classic paper, which acknowledges this and then says, it's this really sad ending to a technical paper, which says, of course, no society can afford to do this. And the jumping off point for my analysis is that we now have a pathway forward that takes the burden off providing that kind of personalized instruction. So my first reaction is, let's just do the stuff that we know works. We know that active learning is an enhancement to learning. Let's do that. We know that formative assessment has massive impact on achievement. Let's do that, and let's absorb the cost that it takes to do that by making better use of the technology.
That last point is a real killer, because this is more expensive. And Bloom's argument, if I remember correctly, is that we can't afford to do this because we can't afford to have a tutor for every human who wants to learn. But
Right.
Your argument is that we can have something close to it if we structure the technology correctly pedagogically, and then also use it so that we can do this without breaking the bank. Yeah, that's a huge claim. And
Yeah, so I think that's where that's where I see this going initially. And there's two ways to approach this. One is the technology as a kind of 21st century broadcast television, and that probably has some advantages and some adherence. But I would prefer not to do it. I would prefer to start with a sound set of pedagogical principles and build up to the technology that you need in order to do that in a cost-effective way, in an effective way, in an accessible way.
I was going to ask about MOOCs later on, but maybe this is a good point to jump in. I really like your distinction between, in my notes, I've just jotted this down as TV pedagogy versus sounder principles, say TV pedagogy versus active learning. That sounds like it maps really neatly onto the distinction that some have made between what others call X MOOCs and C MOOCs. And if you guys all on this conference haven't heard these terms, let me just quickly explain. X MOOC stands for the EDX model, or the Stanford model, where you have a very, very large MOOC of hundreds of thousands of learners. The emphasis is on content pushed out, interacted with. So it's often video recordings and exercises that are often either automated or self-assessed. And the interaction between students is relatively rare and not very satisfying. Question boards. Opposed to the X MOOC would be a C MOOC. C can stand for Canadian or Connectivist, and that is a smaller scale, often 1,000 or fewer. And the emphasis is on using social media to build a conversation in a constructivist way, so that most of the content of the class actually consists of discussion among participants. Examples of the latter would be, say, the Phonar MOOC on digital photography from Britain, the original MOOC, the Connectivist MOOC from Siemens and Downs, or the DS-106 MOOC series out of the University of Mary Washington. So C MOOC, no one likes those terms, but it's kind of the best we have. But does that map onto the pedagogical differences you're discussing?
So I mean, because I started thinking about MOOCs before we had this phylogeny of MOOCs. I really interpreted the word massive in MOOC as scalable, and to me, I keep coming back to what's important about the way we're utilizing the technology, and the way that we're utilizing the technology here at Georgia Tech, and I think in a lot of places that are thinking along the lines, is it removes physical constraints. So when we invest in a series of courses for the introductory engineering sequence, for example, what I have in the back of my head is a full classroom, and what can we do by taking that full classroom out of the picture and telling students, you're free to take this. Our students, Georgia Tech students, you're free to take this course when you need it, without regard to whether a section is filled or not. And so, if you just do that, there's a bunch of technologies that you have to sort of face head on. You can't assume that a Google Hangout is going to be useful for a collaboration medium, because you can only fit so many people in a Google Hangout. You can't assume that there's going to be a single instructor that grades every 10-page term paper in a class with 600 students in it. You can't do that. Those are not scalable. Those are not scalable things. But those are exactly the things that impact even a residential place like Georgia Tech. And I think what we're seeing with the initial successes of some of these online programs, is that people have become really creative about what exactly does it mean to be scalable in this environment. I have some examples that we can talk through later on, but just to kind of fix your mind and where I think this is going. We have a Physics 101 MOOC. This was a MOOC that we developed for the Gates Foundation. And what we've done is we filled this virtual classroom with all kinds of students. Some of them look very much like Georgia Tech freshmen. Some of them look like high school students scattered around the world. Some of them actually are high school students that show up on the Georgia Tech campus in the summer. But we haven't tried to recreate the experience of a physical classroom. The instructor for the course is a very talented physics professor named Mike Schatz, who has reimagined, for example, what a laboratory looks like in this environment. So you need to have a laboratory for a physics course. You can't fit everyone in a kind of dusty basement laboratory that you would find on a typical campus. So he's replaced the idea of a laboratory with processed video. And if I can just get geeky for a second, in his module on the equation of motion, for example, instead of rolling balls up cardboard planes, he sends students out into the real world to shoot basketballs and take videos of those basketballs. Those video files get uploaded to a server in North Carolina, processed, sent back to the students in the form of a clickable file, so that students can generate the equation of motion of a basketball being shot in Earth gravity and gravitational field. And then that's the report that they wrote. The report is also a video report, and he had to figure out how do those reports get assessed. So this is like if you give a mouse a cookie. Once you start down the pathway that says that video is my medium. Video is how students are going to experience their interaction with the physical world. Then you start to imagine, so what do all these other things look like in that world? And the critical thing about this is that it's designed from day one to be scalable. It's not a retrofit of a physical place that we're all used to. It's a reimagining of what a physics course is supposed to be.
Oh, this is terrific. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things for this. One is you remind me of what happened with a lot of pedagogy in Second Life back in the day, that a lot of people would reproduce the classroom. I mean, they had an infinite space which you could do anything with, and people would actually reproduce a classroom and seats, Franklin chairs, and all of that. This is crazy. Why not have people fly or be underwater? But they really, Catherine Murray has this point that when we have a new technology, we tend to reproduce the old technology first in it, and then we do something new. It sounds like you're leapfrogging into something new. Video is the medium. If we assume that for learning, then you have to see what else changes. I think that's a very, very powerful insight. I really admire the constructivism of having students shoot footage of them playing basketball and watching this and then uploading it. I think that's a tremendous.
And this really kind of rumbled through the whole pedagogical design of physics 101 to the point that Mike had to rethink. So what does a lab report look like in this world? It's not something torn out of a 3-ring binder with check boxes on it. It all becomes a video report that's made available for peer review. And then he had to ask, how do we calibrate peer review? So all of these things kind of stemmed from this one idea that we want to make Physics 101 a scalable, more effective educational experience for undergraduates than the existing bricks and mortar experience would have been.
I think this is, very quickly, because we have a lot to cover. What else, where can people go easily to find more examples like that?
Well, I mean, you can come to places like us or any of the places that are going through these reinvention processes. Curtis Bonk at Indiana just published a compendium this summer that's not quite a research monograph. It's a set of initial observations from places that jumped into to this version of online instruction over the last couple years, and it really has a kind of a case study feel to it. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. Here are the questions yet to be answered. And you can see at the edX research conferences, you can see the Coursera partners conferences. Every year, there are more people coming back with more mature methodologies for addressing those questions. They don't seem like as you might have expected, religious revivals. They are really coming back with a set of experiences that we wouldn't have been able to gather otherwise. And now we have those assets available to analyze.
I think that that echoes Clay Shirky's comment a few years back in praise of MOOCs. I think it was in 2012, actually, the Magic Year,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
he said that one advantage they have is a much more rapid cycle. But let me shift the ground a little bit, because this is one key thread in your book and in your work. And let me ask about the institutions in which these experiments occur. And one I wanted to ask was, thinking about the pecking order that you so thoroughly demolish across chapter after chapter of your most recent book, where do you first do you see changes coming in the medium term future for that pecking order? Do you see the U.S. News and World Report being shouldered aside or being mutated? Do you see the Times Literary Supplement version changing, or is that pecking order going to last for a while?
So one can only hope. I make no secret of the fact that I think these linear rankings of universities are an enormous waste of time and an enormous waste of money. When I interviewed John Hennessy for Revolution, he was very quick to point out to me the amount of money that a family will spend distinguishing between 10th and 11th place in the U.S. News rankings, a position that has absolutely no bearing on anyone's life whatsoever. But families are willing to devote tens of thousands of dollars to that distinction, and those things are not a positive influence. I was reading your compendium of your recent blog post on queen sacrifices, and there was this little throwaway quote from Janet Napolitano about what's going on at Berkeley. I think she called Berkeley's choices a well-intentioned. Well, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that you are spending money to defend your perch on a hierarchy that's completely meaningless to anyone except you. And the media interests that are promoting this idea, of course, are making enormous amounts of money on it, and the whole ecosystem that's built up around it has grown up on exactly that value proposition. I don't know how quickly that is displaced. I would like to say I see it disappearing tomorrow, but there's something about human nature that likes to see things ranked and reduced to a single figure of merit. I don't think that's necessarily an argument for us cooperating with them, and we should be thinking about other ways of looking at the worth of institutions.
I agree. And I had hopes for the federal government re-envision of that, and that didn't pan out so well. Well, allied to that, then let me ask: besides relying on the human desire to work with pecking orders, how do you think the academic elite institutions will act in order to maintain the system that they benefit from over the next decade?
Well,
the most well. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's really a great question, and it's an unknown. I think what are institutions willing to do, able to do. Much to my surprise, and if you've read my first book, Abelard to Apple, I was pretty hard on elite institutions. Much to my surprise, it's the leadership of not all of them, but a number of elite institutions that have been the most forward-thinking and the most egalitarian in this world. Maybe led by Chuck Vest, the late president at MIT, who almost single-handedly pushed through this idea of opening up the MIT course catalog so that anyone can access materials that are available to MIT students. Really a singular act. I don't know of any other single act aside from maybe the formation of Open University 80 years ago that matches that in terms of social impact. So it's clearly not the case that all elite institutions are thinking along those lines, and in every case study there are pluses and minuses. But I'm really pleased to see the number of excellent institutions. I'm not going to use the word highly ranked. Excellent institutions that have invested in making higher education more accessible, more more affordable, more likely to achieve educational results that we can all hope for.
So it sounds like if I wanted to be very cynical, I could say that that would help buttress the academic elite. It would help address the rise of
Yeah,
demand, for
yeah,
instance.
yeah. It could turn out that way, or it could turn out that there's a rearrangement in which some currently elite institutions remain at the top of the pyramid, and there's a shuffling underneath. I was really careful in Revolution to reach out to institutions that you wouldn't normally think of as being thought leaders in this area. And the one I keep hearing about is Jackson State University in Mississippi. So Jackson State, historically black university in the middle of Mississippi, was going through the same enrollment pressures that you see in other HBCUs. And with the appearance of a new president, decided to shelve its old approach to addressing students of color and reorient the institution. Now, it's really, this is a recent development, so I don't have long-term data to rely on. But everything you see about this experiment is that they have used technology, not MOOCs, interestingly enough, but they have used technology to make what I call the accidents of circumstance that HBCUs have to deal with more manageable for students coming into that environment. And their initial response was to start getting back some of those students that were forsaking Jackson State for Mississippi State and Ole Miss, where there are really well-known football teams, and coming back more to the mission of what an HBCU is supposed to be. So for every MIT or Penn or Stanford in the headlines of the New York Times, there's also a Jackson State that it takes a little bit of work to uncover exactly what's going on there and what it is that they're contributing to this revolution.
I'm really glad that you did that. I find most of the conversations tend to focus on Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, Columbia. It's vital to look at institutions which actually educate the majority of people. Well, along those lines, looking at institutions changing, how do you see academic labor changing? I'm thinking of the entire system. That is, we have the tenure system, which is, as you know, has been shrinking since the 1980s. We have the rise of adjuncts, who are now the largest majority of instructors for the first time in American history. They're almost a numerical majority. We have the rise of unions in the adjuncts. And this is happening both at K-12 and higher ed. I mean, K-12 world is a little different, but there's a lot of pressure on labor there. How do you see this changing? I know in your book you're not a big fan of the faculty governance, and I get the impression as well that tenure you criticize in many ways for being not doing what it's supposed to do. What do you think is going to happen, and what would you like to see happen?
Yeah, so I channel. I think a careful reading of the book shows I'm channeling revolutionaries, and you know, I don't make any secret of where my loyalties lie, but you know, a fair reading, for example, of the tenure system in the U.S. is we don't have to do anything. Tenure as an institution for guaranteeing academic freedom is on the decline. It will probably never disappear, but it'll become rare and replaced by other things. And you know, it's not that I'm delighting in this prospect. In fact, I'm someone whose academic career was enhanced by the availability of tenure and the protections I got. But more and more market forces are going to take over, and there'll be other ways of ensuring academic freedom. And the same thing with governance. By the way, I mean governance has been taken over by organized labor, and you see more and more what passes for governance being protecting interests of of small groups of faculty. My hope is, whether or not those institutions change, that we realize that in this new world, professors can't shoulder the burden on their own. They will need an ecosystem of colleagues in order to be successful. So in our case, for example, it's not only professors teaching MOOCs, it's instructional designers, it's data analysts, it's advisors, it's videographers, it's the people that interact with concerns that students have about how the technology works and get on with the business of learning. So a professor like Mike Schatz, the physics professor, probably has a team of 5, 6, 7 people surrounding him that makes that course successful. We're not going to expand the workforce by a factor of 5, so that has to be carved out of something. And I think it'll be carved out of a reshuffling of where we actually need the resources and what expertise do we need in order to be successful.
I'm nodding vigorously at a lot of this. I just tweeted twice because this is very important to see. Uh, I'm not seeing any countervailing force for the decline of tenure. I'm not seeing any public demand for more tenure. I'm not seeing any financial power being devoted to that. Uh, I think you're right that it is becoming rare and will become things. I'm really struck by your comment about, if I can paraphrase, the sense that academic labor will be increasingly team-based. You'll be teaching a class on Java, and you will have a video editor who will help you with the class. You have a designer who helps you with the class. You may team teach this with somebody located somewhere else in the world. The question I have is, do you think this will be easier for the scientists to do and less easy for the humanists? Because generally speaking, the scientists tend to work more collaboratively. They tend to co-author and by, whereas the humanists, we tend to work by ourselves.
Yeah, I think you're right. It probably will be in the near term. I don't think it has to be. And I mean, the context from my remarks are that I think the humanities have been in transition for some time now, from an old view of scholarship to a new view of scholarship. If you look at everything from methodologies in social sciences to the impact of computerization on the analysis of text, for example, there's an old guard that is kind of protecting the academy as it existed a while ago. I don't know how long ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago. And there's a lot of exciting, let's take sociology. There's a lot of exciting sociology that's being done by applying natural language processing to old newspaper accounts and using machine learning to infer connections that wouldn't have been apparent in old statistical models that undergirded sociology. Where do those people go? Some of them go to enlightened sociology departments. Some of them are lucky enough to find their way into places where people like Clay Shirky teach. A lot of others just get shut down. So they get shut down because they don't fit a mode of scholarship that's currently in vogue. I'm not steeped in those disciplines, so I don't know how quickly the tipping points are going to be reached. But I certainly see among my colleagues in those areas a definite shift. And if you believe in the structure of scientific revolutions, this is probably a 17-year cycle that we're in, and my grandkids, by the time they get to college, simply won't know what we're talking about when we talk about these sorts of issues.
Well, the phrase I was expecting you to use was humanities, and that's a phrase of art that refers to basically the use of digital technology to further humanities-based inquiry. I wouldn't be surprised if our grandchildren don't use that term because they just say humanities instead. I think there's so many questions that come up with what you just said. let me turn to one question that came up from the audience. Greg Britton, Johns Hopkins University editor, Johns Hopkins University Press editor, asks, the MOOC classroom seems to be enormously collaborative, or can shift to have an enormously collaborative prospect. That raises interesting intellectual property questions. Um, that's an observation. I wonder, do we have to revisit things like work for hire, and perhaps this is where open access comes in?
Yeah, I would say I spend an embarrassingly large portion of my time dealing with issues like that. I mean, we've already always taken the approach here that we want to follow the open access model. I mean, I encourage faculty members to make their content available under Creative Commons licenses, to not put intellectual property restrictions on it. And Georgia Tech has been really helpful in doing that. But everyone comes to the table with a kind of viewpoint about who owns the stuff that they're doing, and what belongs, and what rights people can have to it. And I don't know how that's going to work its way through this human network that we have. I suspect not uniformly. We will many different flavors and many different models. But remember, the people that we're educating, the people that are going to be most likely to be attracted to this form of education have grown up in a remix culture. They've grown up in a culture of sharing and use, and the things that we think are cast in concrete are quite remote to them. So I don't know where the university presses, for example, end up in all of this. But my guess is that from a courseware standpoint, we end up with something more like the MIT OpenCourseWare model than the Prentice Hall textbook published under imprimatur model. I don't know where in that spectrum we end up with, but it certainly is moving more towards an open model, I believe.
I find it fascinating that you and I can go from talking about the physical classroom to the digital classroom, mastery-based learning and neuroscience to scholarly publishing in just a few minutes. I think that speaks obviously to your work, but also to the nature of how technology defamiliarizes all these connections. I'd like, in each time, I want to make sure that we talk about your center, and or if you could speak from the center's point of view. In my work through the Future Trends Project, I've been looking at the trends that are shaping and reshaping education. And I'm curious about right now, from the Center for 21st Century Universities, which of the trends do you see as the most significant? Are you say at the rise of open, or are you looking at demographic changes, policy changes, economic changes? Which are the trends that really grab your attention the most?
Yeah, so like all these transformations, I think it's an interweaving of the things that you mentioned. I can tell you, for example, that we're engaged in a long-term exercise here to look at the future of this particular university from the standpoint of who is going to benefit from Georgia Tech over the next generation. And I'm always hesitant to put a time frame on it, because I'm always wrong by a factor of 10. So when I say generation, I could mean 2 years. Where are the students going to come from? And I'm constantly surprised by the answers we get to those questions. So you may know, for example, that Georgia Tech has an online master's in computer science. It was already a well-regarded, highly ranked, if I could say that, highly ranked degree, but it was available for $45,000. And when we decided to do the MOOC version of that degree program, it was with an eye towards making a topic for topic, assessment for assessment equivalency between the in-person classroom experience and the MOOC experience. My thought was that I think this was going to be successful. This is back when it was being proposed. I didn't know how it was going to be successful, but I really believe that it would be successful in a zero-sum game kind of way. It would be successful because it hollowed out a number of other master's degree programs. Turned out not to be the case. What turned out to be the case was completely unexpected. What turned out to be the case is that we expanded the market for graduate degrees in computer science by 8%. So in 1 year, this one program expanded the number of people who were enrolled in master's programs in computer science by 8%. Play that out over 10 years, that's a doubling of the market in graduate degrees in computer science due to this one program. We have hundreds of graduate programs that are in a similar situation. So if this is something that turns out to be an economic reality, what does it mean? It means we've gone a long way towards the goal that I started out writing about in Revolution, which is to expand accessibility. And if it works at the graduate level, it almost certainly will work at the undergraduate level and at the middle school level and at the high school level. So those kinds of surprises are really with us every time we look at the data, and that's kind of what we do in the center. We look for those big trends and figure what can we do about it? What can we demonstrate today?
When do you think the majority of teaching will be done entirely online?
I don't know. I think probably never. My guess is that that there will be a blending of online instruction and in person instruction for the foreseeable future for most people. One of the things that we're thinking about here is how you project the online masters in CS to Africa, for example. And it's a subject of discussion. We don't know how much of this instruction is going to be done totally online because that divide between the U.S. education system and higher education in Africa is deep, and we don't really understand it. My guess is we're never going to be 100% automated in that, and we probably shouldn't be.
That's quite an answer. That wasn't what I expected. That's a powerful answer. At a meta level, you discussed how your center works very hard to watch all these trends and to determine which ones are most salient. Collectively, what are your sources for learning about the future of education? Where are your favorite sources for thinking about this?
I'm big on field trips, and so I spend a lot of time visiting campuses, some of whom are the well-regarded places we were talking about, some of which are community colleges, two-year colleges, state schools, former teachers colleges, minority-serving institutions that wouldn't be on the top of your list for places where innovation is taking place. But as I have these discussions around the country, someone says, "Well, have you talked to so and so at a little place in Arizona that serves primarily Native Americans?" I said, "No, I haven't. I should go talk to that person." So every one of those conversations kind of inspires me to dig under the surface and see, so exactly what is the principle at work here and how can it be brought into the discussion?
Are there any online sources or experts, or any, if I can be so retro, any print sources that you commend attention?
For sure. Most of them are people I talk to on a regular basis anyway, or since you and I have struck up this relationship in the last few months, bringing more and more thinkers into the fold. I have a hard time separating the easy answers that you see in the media from the more substantive discussion. So I tend not to read, for example, the New York Times supplement on education anymore. because it's not so much about education as it is, who did the New York Times get a byline from in order to produce this magazine. And the more the mainstream media, I think moves towards mass media marketing of what they're doing, the more space there is for people with serious thinking and serious proposals to go along with them, to come into the space and help move the needle.
Oh, very good. I'd go back to your earlier comment about how teaching changes and research changes. I find the best way to keep it is through networking like mad. Just being able to get uh, building up networks through whatever means. Some face to face, some based in videos, some based in social media. No, I think that's a really good answer. Uh, just when I ask this question, people rarely have one person to point to or one site to point to. They really, it's an emergent field in many ways. Uh, we have a question from the audience, and please, if I mispronounce the speaker's name, please forgive me or type it phonetically so I can correct it. Leah McVie, or Lee McVie, she says, I get concerned. Our views of higher ed reform are limited. It doesn't include higher ed as a leader in society. That's the first part. Second, it doesn't include higher ed taking a system, futures, and sustainability approach to assisting society in achieving its preferred future. It doesn't include lifelong learning needed in society today and higher ed playing a role in it. Lay, please correct me if I misspoke this or paraphrased it. Please, Rich, take a whack at this terrific question.
Yeah, I think a lot of my reaction to that, it depends on the context that we're in. In the U.S., we're so decentralized that I don't know that there can ever be a system-wide impact that higher education has. It has to be a combination of sociology and economics and education and technology and all the things we come to know and love. I look at the adoption rate for MOOCs in French-speaking Africa, for example. That's a completely unexpected development in my book, anyway. You're in countries where there was official meddling with the economics orthodoxy that could be taught in universities, and now all of a sudden into that environment you plop open courseware that is probably not going to be blocked by the authorities because they don't have the capabilities. In those instances, you really have a chance to change things. When Andy Young was writing the foreword for my book, he kept coming back to places in Africa that were instrumental in producing the leaders in Southern Africa, essentially change society. Little places like Fort Hare University, which I had never heard of before, but produced Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and all of these people that were giants of their generation, all came out of this one place. And so as those places become more healthy and more stable as a result of the assets that are being provided by the rest of the world, the more impact there's going to be on the rest of society.
That's a terrific example. And again, it's a sign of just how our conversations are moving. Now that we've talked about changes in macro curriculum, Francophonic Africa, I do want to press a little harder on Lee's question, though. I think if we take a look at the U.S., yes, we have a famously disintegrated or decentralized, disunified higher education sector. The same is largely true of our K-12 as well. We don't have our Department of Education is relatively young. It's only from the Carter administration, has very little authority. That said, we do have some systems that have very specific social missions. So you can take a look at, say, the SUNY system in New York, which has that mission of elevating the population of New York State. You could think about the three-tiered system in California,
Right.
the University of California system, the California State, the community colleges, with that great California plan mission, which you've written about. Then we also have sectors that cut across the states. So we think about the huge community college sector, which is what educates almost one half of American students. with its very specific community-based social mission. And so maybe we do have those social missions. Let me turn that around. Do you think those missions, like the pecking order of higher education, do you think those missions will persist? Or do you think they'll change, erode, or mutate into something else as the entire landscape changes?
I counted, as I was looking this morning, I counted something like 25 institutions in the last 6 months that have gone through the Queen Sacrifice model. And if that number is remotely right, we're talking about 100 institutions a year that are actively divesting substantial portions of their mission to be replaced by what? I mean, the critics, I think, of what I'm talking about would take the point of view that I'm advocating for a vocational view of colleges and universities, and good riddance to all this humanities stuff. I don't think that's what's going on at all. I think there's a realignment around the missions, and what we'll see is institutions that used to be strong across the board becoming much more focused. Institutions like Jackson State, if I can come back to that example, that were in the process of narrowing their mission and narrowing their scope, all of a sudden poking their heads up and say, we're going to get great by expanding, not by narrowing the size and capabilities of our freshman class, but by expanding it. It was a big shock to me to visit this historically black college and hear them talking about the bell-shaped curve of their freshman class, because that's often used as a code for discrimination. What they were saying is that a freshman class of African American students needs to be in the rich experience that they would be in a large public university, and the only way to do that is to take their mission not as a straitjacket, but as a platform to launch from. So those kinds of things, I think will happen on their own. It's hard to know what's going to happen. You keep coming back to the elites. It's hard to know what's going to happen at the elite levels. I think to some extent, what happens at the elite institutions becomes less and less important to everyone else who's participating in higher education. It's not a competitive market when an elite institution can charge whatever it wants for tuition and have no trouble filling up its freshman class. On the other hand, that has almost no bearing on what happens at Miami-Dade or at any of the Central Valley colleges in California. And I would argue, even for an institution like ours, which is a pretty standard and demanding institution, we look at what's happening there. It really doesn't affect us on a daily basis. And the farther we get away from trying to imitate what happens at those places, the more that distance is going to arise. The 60 members of the American Association of Universities. These are the elite research universities, and I talked to their provosts a couple of years ago, and they were pretty split down the middle between those who were trying to protect where they were and those that were really self-consciously looking out and saying, well, the climate is changing, students are changing, economics is changing. How do we have to anticipate that, and where will we be as a result? So who knows where that's going to end up down the line, but I think that's the direction that things are heading.
That is such a rich answer that I'm afraid that you may have just sketched out the outline for your next book. Uh, we have a lot more Twitter commentary, and we have very little time left. Uh, Let me just ask any. I have questions of my own, but let me just ask people in the shindig in the various rooms here. This is the time for one last question. So please click on the raise your hand or the ask buttons in the bottom right, or throw it into the chat box. We have time for one more question from all of you guys. And let me see if we have any more from the Twitter feed. Not right. Rich, when we're done with this, you have to take a look at Twitter. Seeing what people pick is really, really fascinating.
Okay.
Some really great comments. Well, if we are still gobsmacked and still working on their own questions, let me ask you one last big picture question. If we can zoom up to the 60,000 feet level and see the Earth rotating beneath our feet, internationalization is happening. We're seeing more and more American campuses open branch campuses abroad. We're seeing a growing, quieter rise of foreign campuses opening campuses in the United States. We're also seeing Americans importing more and more students, both undergrad and grad students. Where do you see that heading? And I mean, this is you personally, Rich, but also your team at the center.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we talk about homogenization a lot, and I think there are pluses and minuses to this idea of homogenization. Um, it's undoubtedly the case that international and foreign institutions, overseas institutions, not American institutions overseas, but in country universities have looked at the rankings, have looked at what it takes to be recognized as a world university, and imitated American institutions. That whole process, as I said in the book, has been aided and abetted by local accreditation agencies. I think that is working in exactly the wrong direction. And in a similar way, for us to parachute in an American institution into a developing country, for example, is not going to benefit anyone. So there's this force, and I think that we probably can't push on it in any productive way, but there will certainly be a trend towards making all universities look more or less like American research universities. The countervailing trend will be this thing that I talk about in the last chapter of the book, which is a recognition that universities are there to serve not a global purpose all the time, but to produce educated citizens for the city, for the town, for the state, for the country, and those are things that tend to be very local and not easily subjected to this homogenization. So I don't know what to make of that trend, except to say when these two things come together, what you're likely to see is forward-looking institutions, forward-looking governments, recognizing that there are assets available to them that weren't available 10 years ago, making use of those assets, and bringing this sense of social contract and social responsibility back to their institutions. You're not going to see that uniformly. We all know what goes on around the world, but there will be places where you can see this happening. I gave two versions of this talk at very traditional universities in Italy over the last 3 years. The first time I gave the talk, there were lots of crossed arms and lots of people sitting back just unwilling to talk about this. I gave the same talk this last summer at the University of Salerno, an old, ancient university in Italy, and it sounded like I was giving a talk at an American university or in my own center. People were informed; they knew what was going on. They knew the weaknesses of the Italian system. So this ferment, I think, is really taking hold. It plays into this idea that there really is a revolution that's rolling around the world in this area.
That's a terrific answer. And this is a theme, internationalization of education, that we're going to return to in later sessions of the forum. Speaking of later sessions of the forum, our time is up. This hour has just flown by.
Flown by.
I want to thank the audience for their questions and the comments. And above all, I want to thank Richard very much for your terrific answers and thoughts. As we thought that you were a very provocative, fascinating, informative speaker. I recommend the audience that you read his two most recent books and that you follow this guy's center online because there's a lot of information. Don't go away yet, Rich. Christopher, if you could just bring up the slides here. We need to point to the next sessions. You see in Shindig we have these two spotlight spots. Here's a stack of URLs. So if you'd like to learn more about Rich, there's the first link is to a page with a biography and more information about him, as well as if you just go to c21u.gatech.edu, you can get much of information, more information about his center. The second is a tag for a series of blog posts that we've been doing about book Revolution in Higher Education, and you can just follow that through. It covers the entire book. Last is for Shindig. I wanted to thank Shindig for their superb technical support in keeping this hour running smoothly and flawlessly. If you look at the right edge of the screen, where you'll see FTTE, picture of a hairy maniac with an axe, and a picture of the Georgia Tech C210RU, icon each of those as a widget to take you to more information about each of those. And if we just go to the next slide, before we go completely, next week, in this same spot, we'll have a new guest. We'll have Casey Green, who is from the Campus Computing Project. Casey is probably the best informed human about how American universities and colleges use technology. His Campus Computing Project has been diving into that for years, a tremendous wealth of information. And we're going to be covering that as well as some brand new research, not yet released today, but will already be out next week in next week's session. So please click on those links to find out more about Casey or about his center, his project. And in the meantime, if you'd like to stick around and chat, we'll be here. I'll be here for a couple of minutes. Let me thank everybody involved again for a terrific session. As soon as we get the recording done, edited and uploaded, it'll be up on YouTube. I'll put a link to that for my blog post along with notes from today's session. So thank you all very much. Appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you again, Rich, and stay warm in that chilly Georgia weather.